Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Rosie here, and I play Dead by Daylight, so you don't have to. Okay? So, today's the day. I haven't made a video in a while, I've been on vacation and work and such, but today we're gonna go into, my idea of the Keystone Killer, and exactly why it fixes, Dead by Daylight. Okay? So, kind of trying to fix Dead by Daylight has kind of been a hot topic as of late, because, the game's a fucking disaster, but, like, what else is new? The frames still aren't fixed. It's awful. Playing the game still sucks. Yada yada yada. We could sit here and talk about that for a significantly longer amount of time. We could sit here and do that. But I've talked about this before in certain videos, and we're gonna go over it today for the most in-depth way that we possibly can. This is the idea of the Keystone character, okay? If you want to realistically fix Dead by Daylight for both parties, this is the way that you're going to have to do it, okay? So what I have here is my tier list, okay? If that has a whole 4.5-hour video in and of itself. This is my tier list for the game in its current form, okay? This is a tier list for a high MMR standpoint. From looking at the game from purely high MMR, this is what you're going to be seeing a lot at high MMR. Okay, the pubs don't matter. Any killer can win in pubs. Okay, rank 1, any killer can win because the game pushes bad players to the absolute top as far as they can possibly take them. Okay, so any character can win at pubs, but at high MMR, this is kind of going to be a general tier list about what's going to be good and what's not going to be good. Okay, now as you can see, this tier list looks a lot different from a lot of other people's because this is a tier list that is very. I consider this to be a forward-thinking tier list. Forward-thinking as in we're thinking about the future. The big oddity would be twins so high up, and then a lot of people have Plague higher than she actually is. Huntress, and Huntress obviously falling to B, like Pyramid Head and B. This is going to be the game that is exposed by the high MMR. Absolutely 100%. When MMR gets dropped in, if it does, still having doubts about that, this is the landscape that it will expose right here. This is the hidden landscape. Okay? And obviously Trickster's getting buffed, so he might not be down there at F forever. But, so this is flawed, okay? And obviously, if you want me to tier Survivor, because a lot of people are like, wow, Oni's in, like, C tier, dude. What are you talking about? Brother Phoenix, like, oh, Oni's C tier. Obviously, if I'm tiering Survivor, Survivor's up here. Survivor is, like, up here. Survivor's an SSS triple, okay? Like, that's how strong Survivor is, okay? But when you're making a tier list for a game, like, you have to make it look presentable. Okay, so like this is obviously our letter system. Survivor again would be in triple S if we were tiering 4-man Swift. But so as you can see there's a serious problem there. If Survivor's all the way up in triple S, a lot of these killers can't compete. And that's the problem you're going to be seeing at high MMR. Is that most of the roster is not viable. Okay, you have two viable characters, two semi-viable characters, and then this tier can kind of win if the Survivors, like... Let's start that over. These two characters can win if the Survivors almost play perfectly. If the Survivors play perfectly, they win every time, okay? If the Survivors make, like one mistake, these two can win. If the Survivors make 2 or 3 mistakes, these characters can win. If the Survivors make, like, around 6 mistakes, these characters can win. And then it takes about 8+ for these characters to win, and then 10+ for C and below to win. Okay, that's pretty much how it takes. You have to making... It's obviously, when you're playing at high MMR, you're only going to see these amount of mistakes. Around 1 and 2, and then... maybe at best, like this is your high MMR right here. These are the characters that can realistically compete at high MMR. Top tier MMR is gonna look like this and this alone. That's what it's gonna look like. Okay, and then cream of the crop MMR is gonna look like that. So that's what you're really gonna be seeing in high MMR. This is like high, kind of high, mid high MMR. This is high MMR. This is top tier MMR. That's what you're gonna see. But beside the point, so that the game is the game is bad. Is what we're trying to say. The killers cannot compete. And why is that? If you look at the top 4 characters in this game, they all share one common thing. They ignore 115 for the most part. Obviously, Twins and Blight have to do 115 sometimes, which is why they're here, whereas Nurse Spirit rarely ever have to do it. Nurse doesn't ever have to do it, and Spirit doesn't ever have to do it really either. Those two don't really ever have to play the fundamentals of Killer, and then Twins and Blight don't ever really have to play the fundamentals of Killer either. These four characters don't play the Killer fundamentals, because the Killer fundamentals are weak. Every character in A tier plays the fundamentals. B plays the fundamentals. These characters all play the fundamentals. That's why they're not as good as these four right here. It's just that. It's just that. These four characters shy away from the fundamentals more than the rest of the roster does. That's why I don't know why people love playing against Blight and thinking that's so fun. It's literally just like the same as fucking Nurse, Spirit, and Twins. Don't understand that. He fucks you just as much as they do, but that's Twins is to Spirit what Blight is to Nurse. We got it. Okay. So basically, the idea of the Keystone character, getting into that finally, is the idea to fix this issue. Okay? So you obviously have two choices to fix Dead by Daylight, okay? The first one is to give every character a significant enough buff to where they can compete, okay? Obviously, this happened with Bubba and Doctor. They were really bad, but and Freddy. Bubba, Doctor, Freddy were given significant buffs and were buffed to the A tier. That happened, okay? They tried with Clown, it failed miserably. But think about how long that took, okay? Think about how long those three reworks actually took. Like, that was a significantly long time. And again, like, they buffed Clown, they kind of reworked Demo. Like, they've been doing this since, what, 2019? And so far, we've had, 4 buffs, 1 add-on pass, that was actually decent. Huntress kind of got an add-on pass, too. The Wraith has some changes. But, like, not a lot of progress has been made, is the point. When you look at the overall roster, they have not made a lot of progress, especially as they keep dumping new shit in the game as well. And the roster's getting bigger and bigger, and then the amount of shit they have to clean up is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They don't have time. I'm sorry. It would be nice if they sat down with every single killer and gave them a huge, massive rework, but they don't have time, and it's not likely the game's going to live that long anyway. Okay? So, that's out of the question. Giving every single killer their own individual rework is absolutely 100% out of the question. Okay? So you have to do blanket changes. You have to do core fixes. The core of this game is absolutely fundamentally flawed. Okay? But here's what you get hit with if you ever bring up core changes. Okay?
Well, if you buff the core, change the core to make all the other characters viable, look what happens to Nurse and Spirit, bro! Look what happens to Nurse and Spirit!
Okay, so here's what they're worried about, okay? Let's say you buff the core. We're going to start changing my tier list here. Let's say you buff the core to make Trickster a C tier character, okay? You nerf all the tiles, fix the objective problems, you make Trickster an absolute C tier character, okay? By the time you have buffed the game enough to where Trickster would be a C tier in the game's current form, this is their argument. What happens is that here's what happens. Here's what happens. Here's what people are worried about. When you buff the core to make Trickster a C tier, here's what the game looks like. This is what people are worried about. This is what making Trickster a C tier character means. Okay. C. B. Let's say B. If you buff the core enough to make Trickster a C tier killer, look what you've done to the tier list. Okay? S plus being these are the characters that now need nerfed because you have changed the core to the point where the Trickster is now a C tier character. The tier list is still the same, mind you, but now that Trickster's a B tier character, look what you've done to everybody else. Okay, so that's why you cannot do blanket changes enough to do the core, but you also can't use Nurse and Spirit as your Keystone to get everybody up to their level because then the tier list looks like this. So if you use Nurse and Spirit as your Keystone characters, this is what the tier list looks like. Everybody is now in double S and needs nerfed. If you buff everybody up to the level of Nurse and Spirit, now the whole roster is in double S and now the whole roster now needs something. We're kind of fucking it up because the fingers are flimsy. Ooh. Is that still right? Let's flip this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah. So now, if you use Nurse and Spirit as your keystone, now the whole roster looks like this, and that's equally stupid because the whole roster is in one tier if you do that. Obviously, power disparity is a natural consequence of variety in your game. Okay, you don't want this right here. Okay, you don't want that. So you don't want to use, this is what happens if you use the top tiers as your keystones. And what happens if you use the bottom tier was the aforementioned tricksters in B, and then everybody else is just an S. And you have that, using the bottom tier is an inverse of what we have right now. But for you, if your argument is that you want to use the top tiers as the keystone, the whole roster looks like this. So the only solution then is that you have to use the mid tiers as the keystones, okay? So going back to what we just had, okay? This is the hard part. We have to, like, fix the whole tier list now. Going back to what we just had. Boom, boom. Boop-a-doo-boo. I'm gonna probably edit this out. Here we go. We're speeding up now. So that's why you cannot use the bottom or top tiers. Both of those are equally as flawed, and the tier list looks as stupid as it possibly could with those two metrics. However, let's say, ladies and gentlemen, that you have decided to make use the mid tiers as the keystones. Okay, your keystone characters right now are these characters right here, the B tier. Pyramid, Nemesis, Huntress, Deathslinger, and Wraith. Those 5 characters are the most important characters on the roster, okay? You need to make core changes until these characters are viable, okay? So what does that mean? Okay, let's say you make core changes, okay, until this happens right here. You make core changes enough to where this happens right here. You balance the maps, nerf everything on the survivor side, and now you have done, and then Trickster's buff gets him out of fucking C tier, the F tier. This is what the tier list now looks like when you have balanced around these mid-tier characters, okay? You have buffed all of a sudden, and then now we assume A tier is viability, okay? Now we assume A tier is viability. Since we've done it, we've now changed the roster, and we balanced around the Keystone characters. Now we have made the roster viable. Now everybody A and up is viable. So now, look at this. You have a healthy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You now have 14 viable characters in Dead by Daylight. Okay? Now, you tone down Nurse and Spirit. Let's say Spirit gets a rework. She's now right here. Then you get Nurse gets a rework. She's around top of A. And now you have Twins and Blight as your best characters in the game. Okay, but you also hit them a little bit. You to nerf their add-ons. You eliminate double S. Now the roster looks like this. Maybe tone down a few of Oni's add-ons. Hag kind of gets a few things. Bubba's camping gets nerfed, so maybe he'll go down here. Now all of a sudden you still have all these viable characters, and then you can buff these guys. Maybe Myers gets that rework we all want. Now he's an A. Like and then maybe he's an A, and then maybe as the roster keeps getting changed, Pyramid falls to B. Nemesis falls to B. Trickster gets a rework. He goes into... Trickster gets more buffs, not a rework, sorry. Demo, the core changes help Demo more. He shoots up to A tier. Like, you see, this is the kind of stuff... You don't know what the kind of predict things are going to happen if you balance around the Keystones. The Keystones are not being balanced around right now. That's the problem. The Keystones are stuck in non-viability. So, when you have high MMR coming into the game, you're only going to see Nurse and Spirit at the top and Twins and Blight over and over and over again. Until the game gets fixed, okay? That's what's going to happen. But if you were to do what I was just suggesting, you had around 14 viable characters, okay? You balance till those B tiers are viable, and then you buff the killers on an individualized basis. Maybe give Legion the buff to get him to B. Bump him up to B, Plague will fall down to C eventually, probably. So you can turn it into an ever-fluctuating cycle of who needs things, okay? And also, when you have buffed around those when you've balanced around those Keystone characters, when you have balanced around those Keystone characters, okay? When you've balanced around them... Oh, it's default. When you have balanced around the Keystone characters, okay, so let's talk about those reworks. You have now changed the number of reworks you need to do from like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Like you have potential. You've gotten rid of the amount of reworks you have to do. You now have to do maximum. Instead of needing to buff everybody and rework everybody on the roster once to make them S tier, you now only have to do 2 necessary reworks in the Nerfs and Spirit, and then maybe some Nerfs and reworks in the Blight and the Twins. You have shortened the amount of reworks to 4. Okay, maximum. Maybe 2 to 4 reworks is what you're now looking at when you balance around those Keystone characters, and the Keystones are viable. When those Keystones are viable, you'll only need to rework 4 characters maximum. Maybe nerf some add-ons of these characters right here. Please, dear God, don't hit Freddy. Freddy's add-ons are fucking terrible. But the point is, you have now lowered the amount of work you have to do on an individualized basis to both sides. From both spectrums of the tier list, you have now lowered the amount of work you have to do because you've balanced around the Keystones. And this is all capable of being done before the game dies. So, those mid-tier balancing around the core until those mid-tiers are viable. That's the Keystone argument. Balance around the core until the Keystone characters are viable, then change the characters at the bottom and top ends of the tier list respectively so that they can all intermingle. We can have a healthy rotation, pretty much. Keeps the meta fresh, keeps the meta healthy, keep power creeping the game, see who kind of falls out of favor when new things become meta, see who rises up. You'll have a healthy rotation, and then once that healthy rotation is started, that's when the competitive scene can start. Until this philosophy is implemented, there is no competitive scene. And that is a 100% fact, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I'm getting the hell out of here. GG's, boys.